All right, so this application that we're going to make, it's just going to have the main app, and then the app is going to have a button. And when you click that button, it will either render. So the first time you click it, it will render the second component, which is just going to, for now, it's just going to be like an H1 tag or something. And then when you click the button again, the component will disappear. So nothing too complicated at first. So I'm going to cd so we'll get this up and running. Okay, and I'm going to go into the source app.js, get rid of all this. And I'm going to turn this into a class-based component first. Importing component, and then I'm going to make class app will extend. Put this in a render. And all right. So H1, this will be whatever. All right, so that is working. And we're going to make another component, which is ultimately it'll just display a random number that we'll get from somewhere else. So I'll just call it random number. Make a components folder. This will be a class-based component as well. All right, so I have this other component, which I've made as a class. I got to export it. And import it over here. And then I will throw that in right here. And there we go. So now my app component is displaying this additional component. So what I want to have in app now is a button. And when I press that button, I'm going to, this is either going to appear or not appear. So any thoughts on what I will need?
You'll need something in the state that says whether the button has been pressed, toggled to true or false.
Okay, good. So so we want something to change in our application, so that basically automatically means that we're going to need state. So let's create some state. And we'll call it toggle. and we'll set it to false initially. All right, so now we have some state. If we look at our dev tools, you can see the app has state. So that's all good so far. But now what we really want is the ability to, well, so we need a button and we need to be able to change our state. Jared, can you help me out here? So we have state, which means that we have the, potential ability to cause a re-render with some updated value. But we need a button to click. We could use anything. We don't really even need to use a button. We could use anything, but we'll use a button.
So we need to create the button.
Yeah.
And the render.
Okay. Yeah. So inside the render, let's say inside this div, I'll create a button right here. And we'll do type. Okay, so we have a button and it doesn't do anything right now. So how do we make this button do something? So when we click it, we want our state to change.
So we can write a function that, like toggle function that changes the state.
Okay. So let's do all right, so we have a function execute toggle.
Okay, so it'd be like this dot set state.
Okay.
And
so the simplest thing we could do is just toggle and then sorry, this we do something like this. We can also probably should pass it a callback, but this will be fine. So we have a function and this function will change our state. So if I click on this, still nothing happens.
okay, and then we need an on click on the in the render.
Okay, in the render, where should I put that?
So in the input, or for the in the button.
Okay, so yeah, so our input we'll have on click, and then what should we pass this?
This dot execute toggle.
All right. So let's see if this works. It looks like it works just because I have the DevTools going on, but let's make sure. So we haven't written any of the logic that will actually change the display, but we can check with the DevTools and we can see that the state is true. Click it again, it's false, it's true, false. So it looks like this is working. We're actually changing our state now. Okay, so what should I do? Cindy. If I now I want to conditionally render this display random number component based on if this is true or false.
You could put an if statement right after the input, and you could say if this dot state dot toggle open bracket then display random number, else I forget what was the overall goal again. Like if it's true, then we want to display the random number, and then if it's false, we want to.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
As long as it's
Okay.
you know, it's doing one or the other. But there's an issue here. So where are we writing this logic here?
Yeah, I think you have to put it. Don't you have to put, like, you have to do you have to do return. Like I didn't figure out how to do that, but in the one time that I did that, I put if this dot state dot toggle, then return display number.
Right. Yeah. So we could do some if. So here in the render function, we can do regular JavaScript stuff without any problem. But in the return, we can't do that. If we want to do JavaScript in the return, we're going to have to do something like that.
Right.
So we could do the if else here and then return, but we have some other stuff here. So it's that might be a little bit messy. So can you almost think of maybe a simpler way to conditionally render?
Put inside those curly brackets, put this dot state dot toggle, and then do double ampersands, I think.
Okay.
And then the component you want to render.
Okay. So that looks very strange to me. What is this?
That is conditional rendering. So if both sides of the ampersands are true, which the one on the right side is by default true because it exists, if both sides are true, then it will render what's on the right side.
Great. Okay. So let's save this. And now I can click, and this appears and disappears. So if it's just like an on-off switch, we can use this. What if I had two components and I wanted to, or even, let's try doing this real quick. So what's my problem that I'm having now? So I'm gonna add some props here, but right now I'm getting a bunch of red squiggly lines.
You have to have a div, overall div or fragment.
Yeah.
Tag. Yeah.
You can only return one element. So okay, so I'm going to display some props here, and I'm going to, instead of this, I'm going to do a a ternary operator. So if I have two possibilities rather than just, you know, something or nothing, I can do this dot state dot toggle, and I'll do And okay, and otherwise toggle false. Comment this out. So here we're not making the component disappear necessarily. We're just changing what gets displayed. So you could do something like this as well, but we're not going to do that. Okay, so now we can we have our toggle that works. So we need to do something with DisplayRandomNumber. So DisplayRandomNumber. So what I actually want to do is I want to every couple seconds display a new random number just automatically. So we'll start with just console logs at first. But I want to display a new random number. So if someone toggles this component, then I'm going to want a new random number initially. And then I want that to automatically keep getting a new number in a cycle. Any ideas how I could do that?
You could do math.random and math.floor.
Okay, so to get an actual random number, yeah, we could do that. I'll ask you for that in a second to actually get the random number. But how should we handle this situation where we want something to kind of automatically do something every couple seconds?
We had our whack-a-mole added a timer the other day, so I'm gonna go look at that.
Yeah, so we did whack-a-mole did something similar. So there's something built into JavaScript, or it's a web API called setInterval. So we can call setInterval. setInterval will take a callback function and then an interval in milliseconds, and it will call that callback function every X milliseconds. So there is a way to do that. You could write a function. Let's say and it's console. And is there let me just look up actually it doesn't even have to be a good number. There we go. Okay, so now I have a function that will, in this case, just log a random number. Is this going to execute?
You're not calling it.
Yeah, so So this is not going to execute. So let's try doing, let's try actually making this set interval. So the set interval will take a callback function, and it will take, we'll do it every 2 seconds. And we'll put that in here. Okay. So I have this set interval function, get random number. So I would like to call this immediately, just kind of automatically.
So on component mount or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. So component did mount. So there's a lifecycle method that we've seen a couple times before. If you're using class-based components called component did mount, and this is where you're typically going to do any kind of like initial setup or API calls, things like this. So component did mount. And we're going to call this dot get random number. All right, so let's see if this works. So can you see my console log there? It's pretty small, but is that, let me zoom in. You guys can see this working. The console log is working. Okay, so that's great. Everything's working. So now I'm done with this component. I'm going to turn this component off. So it's all done, right?
You have to cancel the the set timer or set interval.
Yeah, so I should cancel it. So what happens if I don't cancel it?
It's gonna keep running.
Yeah, and not only that, but what if I keep doing this? Now I have just a ton of set intervals running in the background. So if I keep toggling on and off, now this is a big mess. So that's a problem. So I can get it started, but I can't stop it. So even though the component is gone, it's still, there's still part of it that's, alive in the browser, and I don't want that to happen. Fortunately, there's another lifecycle method, and that lifecycle method is called component WillUnmount. All these lifecycle methods are very descriptively named. So component WillUnmount, and most of them have been kind of deprecated. So component WillUnmount, if you can guess, it will run right as the component is about to be unmounted. So first off, I'll just console log. Okay, so now I turn it on. I get my random number, that's great. And I unmount it, and it tells me that, my component is about to unmount, but that's just because I console log that. I'm not actually doing anything. So this component is gone. As far as React is concerned, this component has been pulled off the DOM. It doesn't exist. If I look at the here it is. So look here, and my div, my app, h1, and the input, and there's nothing else. So this component is actually not on the DOM anymore, but it's still, some process that I started here is still going. So we need to do something in component WillMount. Now, I won't go into this, but there's a way to clear this. So we can grab a reference to this, and then we can clear it. You can do something like ClearInterval and my interval. Is there a problem with this?
Scope.
Yeah, so my interval is a local variable inside this method, and I'm trying to access it inside of another method. So one, the easiest way to get around that is to just make it an instance attribute. So my interval, yeah. Something like that. So now this dot my interval and this dot my interval. I'll refresh this, and I'm going to mount this. So my random number has started, and I'm going to unmount it. And now it actually stops. So I've cleaned up. I initiated a process when the component mounted, and I'm cleaning it up before the component goes away. Okay. So now what I'd like to do is,
Chad,
yeah.
I missed it, but when does the component go away? Again, like what makes it go away?
That's just right here. When we click on this button, we change the state here of app, which triggers a re-render of app. And since app controls whether or not this renders. So let's add some state. And this time we'll put our random number in here. So we'll start it at 0. And then here, instead of console logging it, well, maybe I'll console log it also. I'm going to set the state. So this dot set state. Okay. So let's take a look at this now. If we look at our components, you can see that our state, so our component is updating. And if we toggle this off, we're still good. So now let's try, we're going to comment out our component. We're going to comment out our cleanup function. So now what we're doing is when the component mounts, it's going to call this function, which is going to create an interval, which is going to be setting our state in the component. So when we unmount the component, we click here and unmount it, then the component is going to disappear, but this function is still going to be alive, and it's going to be trying to set the state of a component that doesn't exist. Let's see what that looks like. So we've started, we're running. Now I'm going to turn it off. So React does not like this. you get a warning. It says, can't perform a React state update on an unmounted component, which makes sense. This is a no-op, but it indicates a memory leak in your application. So can anyone tell me what a memory leak is?
When an application takes up memory and doesn't give it back when it's done using it, and then eventually you run out of memory.
Yeah, exactly. So it's what happens when you have, if you have something like this where a process is kind of running, it's part of the application or was maybe part of the application originally. Now it's just running, doing its own thing using memory, and it's kind of divorced from the rest of the application. So this is something you can run into. I think you run into it more with lower level languages where you actually control memory allocation and deallocation. But especially in, what do you call it? Embedded components, things that run for a long, long time without ever being like turned off. If you have a memory leak, even a small one, that will eventually break everything. So we don't want that. So we definitely don't want memory leaks. So it's important to clean up. And with a class-based component, you can clean up like this. Okay, so that's
Chad, one second.
Yeah.
One question. So what if you want to use, you might have covered it in a previous class, my brain just doesn't remember it now. What do you want to use like this, the component did mount twice here? It seems like it's all grouped together. Like what if I wanted to mount two components on this page?
So
that's just bad, you don't do that. It's like Cross the Streams and Ghostbusters.
Yeah, component did mount is only for this component. So this doesn't control any other components. So if let's say this display random number component also rendered some child components here, it wouldn't have any control over that.
But you can't, like, that did mount is doing the this.getRandomNumber function. So you can't have two functions and mount one and unmount another all in one component.
Have two
Like,
functions.
what if I wrote get random number and get random letter, but I wanted it all in this one component we just wrote, display random number. I can't turn one off and leave one running.
I think you, yeah, I mean, you could. So, I mean, if you want, in this example, if you had two set intervals, one for like getting a random number and one for getting, so let's just do that real quick. So you could definitely clean up one and not the other. I don't know how we're going to get a random letter, but
I mean, it can just be a whole nother number. We just do two numbers to make it easy. Just clean one number up and leave one number running.
we'll do a negative one. Yeah. And let's make this just 1 second. And then, yeah, we're just console logging them. So you refresh this. So there's the negative, positive, negative, negative, positive, and so on. So they're both running now. And if I unmount, so right now I'm only going to unmount. Actually, these are both assigned. I guess, yeah, okay. So let me fix this real quick. So this will be my pause. Let's see. So now I'll refresh this, and it's starting, so negative and positive. And if I turn this off, the positives have stopped, but I'm still getting this. But it is the same random number. That's interesting.
And then the next question would be then, so if you want, I mean, it doesn't work. If you wanted to stop that second random number, you can't do another component WillUnmount function, right? If you don't unmount them both at the same time, you can't unmount one and then unmount the other.
So these are not this again, the component, the mounting, the component DidMount and component WillMount refers to this class right here.
Okay.
Not to anything else inside of it. So this DisplayRandomNumber, the component DidMount refers to this thing itself.
Okay. So it just controls what's inside of this class only.
Yeah. But only itself. It doesn't control even any child components that it has. Yeah, so I'm not sure why the same negative number was displaying. That's something to figure out later.
So
Yeah,
something
that's good. I didn't mean to derail the conversation.
No, that's fine.
Something interesting I've noticed. You're creating my interval positive and then making it null and then changing it later. With the negative number, you're not creating that initially. That you're just on. It's basically being created on line 18.
Yes, that is true. I guess I don't really need. Yeah, that is. Maybe you can just do that with JavaScript classes. Yeah.
It would be hard to find it though later on, I guess, for readability, but interesting.
Yeah. So the always forgiving JavaScript. Okay, so let's go into functional components. So I'm gonna, I guess I'll just leave this the way it is. We can come back and change this to functional later if we want. But this display random number.
Chad, before we move on, can I just, with the actual mounting and unmounting, is that actually, like, does unmount actually mean when it's taken off of the page, or is it when the whole thing is re-rendered? Does it mount and unmount the things that are staying the same, or only the things that are changing?
So I'm not exactly sure on if it's when it unmounts from the virtual DOM or the actual DOM. So I don't know like the exact moment when this is called. Component WillUnmount.
But if it's being, if there's a re-render called because of for any reason,
yeah,
and let's say our display random number stays displayed, it doesn't unmount and then get remounted on the re-render. It never unmounts at that point. Is that true? As far as we're concerned with component WillMount component WillUnmount.
Sorry, could you ask that one more time?
Yeah, so if we if something on our application triggers a re-render,
right,
but display random number is still going to be rendered, if that doesn't change.
So if we had some other state in an app that changed that wasn't related to this.
Right.
Okay, so we have some other state, the state changes in app re-renders everything.
So it's just re-rendering. It's not taking display random number off. It's not unmounting it. It's
correct.
Staying displayed. So this won't. So that life cycle function doesn't happen.
Right. It
Okay.
only happens on the, so this component did mount. It doesn't happen every time it gets updated props or anything. There are actually other lifecycle methods that can handle that, but this is only going to get mounted once, basically. It'll get mounted once. It doesn't matter how many times it can get re-rendered, you know, things can get triggered, but it's only going to mount once.
Even if it gets unmounted and then it's toggled back on, does that count?
Yeah.
As a remount?
Yes.
Yeah, then it would be. Okay.
Yeah. Here, if we remove it, then that's unmounting. But if we just change its props, it's not going to unmount it.
Right.
Okay, so let's turn this into a function. Do that up here. All right, so I'm going to copy this return. This dot props will have to change. So let's just kind of slowly work our way back up there. So we know we're going to need state. So how do we handle state in a functional component?
Const and then brackets, and then in the brackets you do the name of the state object, and then set in the name of the state object.
Okay.
And then that equals useState,
Right.
which you have to import up top.
Okay.
And since we're starting out at 0, so you could just set it that to be 0.
Okay. So we're going to call the UseState hook. And here the first parameter will be the initial value. And we'll use destructuring. And useState is going to return two things. One is the state, like the item of state, and the other is a function to update the state. Okay, so that takes care of that. This get random number, I think we can take that as well. So actually, I think I'll do this inside of the function, so I don't have to worry about that. So if I want to handle the component did mount, I don't have component did mount because this is not a class component.
UseEffect.
Right.
And then you do the callback function, I think. And then after the callback function, you do the brackets with nothing in it so that it runs it when it first loads.
Okay. So we can call it, so the only thing that it needs is a callback function. And then there's this optional second parameter, which is a dependency array, which controls basically under what circumstances it will run. We'll look at that in just a second. So I'm going to, let's do positive. Okay. So in useEffect, I have this other function, which is setInterval, and then I'm not going to run this .setState. So first off, I'll console log the num. Let's comment this out. Let's try doing this. Let me get rid of that. Okay. So it's console logging. We're not actually setting the state at all. So it's just console logging the num, the whatever the state is, and it's doing it. And if I turn this off, this is not stopping. So just like before, it's hard to see this, but this is still going. So we've got the same kind of issue here. So the thing is, one of the reasons people like hooks is because it combines things. So if we want to handle the situation in a class-based component, this is a common pattern, right? I want to start something, and then I want, like, start a subscription or whatever, and then cancel it before the component is removed. So we can actually combine this with useEffect. So useEffect takes a callback and it'll execute the callback, but there's also an optional return. So if you want to run cleanup on useEffect, you return another function, which is a little weird, but that's how they do it. So if we want to clean up whatever we're doing in useEffect, we return a function. And in this case, I'll just console.log. Refresh this. Turn this on. It's going, and then this cleanup executed when I unmounted the component. I'm still not doing anything, but you can see that same process. I'm actually, it's going to execute this function when the component is about to unmount. So in here, we can do the same thing we were doing before, and we can call ClearInterval, my interval positive. And let's take a look at this again. So that's going, and I unmount the component, and that's it. It stops.
Where'd the clear interval come from? Is that like just an internal command? I missed it.
Yeah, ClearInterval is just, this is just, yeah, it's a web API, so it's not really, it's not part of the built-in JavaScript, but it's available to you in the browser. So setInterval and ClearInterval, these are
Okay.
web APIs. And we can do the same thing. So we can change our state. We can set the state to be that random number, but we don't do this .setState. We just do setNum. And we can just pass it in this directly. And I'm going to add this here. We're getting our random numbers. And then I'm going to unmount the component. So yeah, I should mention, so you can see that this cleanup is getting called. So we can set this useEffect, since we don't have any dependency, anything in the dependency array, it's going to run as often as it can, which is when it mounts and every time it re-renders. So every time it re-renders, it's actually clearing the interval and everything. So we can control that a little bit if we don't want to be re-rendering unnecessarily. We can pass an empty dependency array, which means it will only run on the mount, the initial mount. So it's not going to run on re-renders. So let's refresh that. Toggle it on. It starts going. I get my random numbers. And then I turn it off.
That was running the cleanup every time it re-rendered.
It was, yeah. Yeah, and for some reason this does not like this.
Is it because you're returning the function and returning the empty bracket?
So yeah, I'm not returning. This is actually the second parameter to the useEffect.
Okay.
So num shouldn't. I mean, this is going to run when num runs anyway. Yeah, I'm also getting a. I must be doing something wrong here. useEffect.
So it's supposed to be running whenever it's mounted or unmounted, not when it's re-rendering. Is that right?
Yeah.
But we're remounting it and unmounting the whole component whenever we're toggling. We're not changing.
Right. So when we toggle, that should run, but when we toggle it on. We're setting the state, but that shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be counting up there. So
The console log is messed up.
Yeah. I'm also getting a squiggly line here, and it's telling me React Hook useEffect has a missing dependency num. Either include it or remove the dependency array, which is not. Let me try. I have my other
I wrote the same exact thing and I don't get that squiggly line in my browser. So maybe your ESLint is
Yeah, I did the same thing, but I do get the oddities that you're showing with the cleanup every time, and now the number that's stuck on 717 just repeatedly. I don't get the squiggly line either, but I get that. I get it stuck on 0 forever unless I put number inside the thing that makes it only render it once.
Let me try. So I unmounted it and it ran cleanup, which is right. So now it's not running cleanup. I don't know what was happening there. But now it's at least doing what it's supposed to be on the cleanup. So it's not running the cleanup function. Every time the state changes, the cleanup is not being run. But when I unmount, then the cleanup runs. So that's what it should be doing. I'm still not sure. There must be some bug here, something I'm doing wrong.
But now, like, it only finds zeros, though, right? If you turn it back on, it'll only find zeros.
Well, the console log here.
Will only show zeros, but it's still changing the number. I got you.
Yeah. So the actual state is correct. This is not.
Didn't we set num to null at the beginning? Is that why?
We set it to 0. Might just be a scope issue. If it only has access to what it gets sent. Let me just try this. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's doing that.
There's an article that says if you use that array for your one-time use in the useEffect, that you needed to include values from the props and state that change over time and that are used by the effect. Otherwise, your code will reference stale values from previous renders.
But if we do this, then it's going to be, it should be re-rendering every time that num changes.
And that's the cleanup happening.
Yeah. But this is, yeah. So if we console log it, then we get the updated value, but now we're doing more renders than we want to do.
It's interesting. I don't know if it matters, but if you go to the component thing on the tools, it just shows state. It doesn't show like state num or set num, but it shows the state changing, but it doesn't even show the ability to see the num as an identifier.
Yeah. So the state is changing properly, and the cleanup. I don't know why before it wasn't doing that, but restarting the server fixed that problem. Yeah, there's still this. So yeah, I guess you have to. So we had a stale value. We had the original value of state that we were console logging here. Presumably, if you're not doing anything with it after the initial render, then you wouldn't need that anyway. But. So just real quick, I want to also show, instead of just using set interval actually use getting information from an API. So here's this. You can go right here and we can get a random number. So I'm gonna take care of this. And then this set interval, we're actually gonna fetch something from a third-party API. So I'm gonna make this an async function. And then we'll do the usual fetch stuff. So and then so no. This is not JSON. This is just, it's just how this particular API works. It doesn't even return JSON. So now we have this. So let's check that out. So we're actually making a call to a third-party API and getting these updated values.
Does the API call show up in the sources in the developer tools, or is there a spot where you can see the call type? Is that a network?
Yeah, the network tab would have that. I don't know that React has a specific. Refresh this. So here, let me expand that. So whoever has this is very nice. They aren't having any CORS restrictions, so I can actually access this. We can see the request headers. Query string parameters and so on. And when I toggle this off, it should stop. So you don't want to be making, a bunch of API calls forever and ever. So here, that's cool. So yeah, so I think I was just doing something wrong before with the trying to console log a stale value from state here, because I think we're getting this dynamically. It's getting updated even in the set interval. So if I think we did this another way, yeah, console logging. Yeah, so if we were potentially, let me try console logging the state again. That should give us the same issue. Yeah, so you get the same issue there. So yeah, I guess if you don't include, so if you add something else, like some bit of state to this dependency array, that means run this useEffect when that thing changes. If you don't include anything, it's going to run all the time. If you include an empty one, it will only run on the initial mount or the initial render. All right. Are there any questions about that? Okay.